Welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast, the show that invites you to take a seat around the community fire and listen to stories that inspire. I'm your host, Kathy Robinson, author, coach, and founder of Athena Wellness, a company that's dedicated to supporting you on your journey to live more wholeheartedly. Hello, and welcome to episode 67. Thanks so much for joining me. Have you ever thought about making a life change but felt it was too late for you? Perhaps you've set aside the dreams you had when you were younger, or maybe you've just fallen into a comfortable life groove. Our guest today, Kristin Duffy, is all about inspiring women to start the second, or third, or fifth chapters of their lives, no matter their age. Kristin is an actor and artistic director of Slackline Productions, a production company she founded to create meaningful roles for women over 35, as writers, directors, and characters in the stories they present. We cover a range of topics, including Kristin's own reinvention, from working in corporate to becoming an actor, what it was like to relocate from the U.S. to the U.K., and the importance of telling stories of reinvention. We end this episode with our Dose of Inspiration segment, where Kristin shares some of the things that are lighting her up these days. And as always, I'll put links to those items and Kristin's website in the show notes. I think you'll walk away from this episode feeling inspired and reminded that it's never too late to start over. And now on to the show. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Well, Kristin, welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you have a very interesting adult backstory, and it seems like, as I read a bit about you, there was life pre-UK and life in the UK. So before we get into our topics that we want to cover today, what would be helpful for our listeners to know about your backstory?
Wow. It's funny because I would say that is true, except for I almost see 3 or 4 different probably segments, I guess, of my life so far, because I grew up in Ohio. So I think obviously growing up in Ohio and then moving to New York City is a pretty big leap. However, that was kind of softened by the fact that I was with the same guy for a long time. We'd started seeing each other in college, really. So we made that transition together. So in a way, that was a more subtle transition than changing maybe whole countries. And then, yes, moving to the UK. And then I've kind of had a couple different segments of my life here. But yeah, I guess the backstory with New York is that I was a fashion designer, designed baby clothes for a couple different companies. But by the time I left, I was a design director for baby boys at Baby Gap. And yeah, it was just, it was a wonderful team and, lots of fun things about it. But I'd always had urges to do so many different things. And coming to the UK was certainly a great opportunity to kind of cut one part of my life, sort of like you said, in half, and then, move on to some different things. So I'm trying to think of anything else that's so interesting that everybody needs to know about my story before the UK. But I mean, I'm the eldest of 6, which I think obviously growing up with 5 brothers and sisters has had a huge impact on my life. I don't have kids of my own, but I certainly feel like that's worth a mention because it has shaped a lot of who I am, I think. And they're worth a shout out anyway.
Absolutely. And even more to be able to take that leap, knowing that you have that anchor. I mean, that's quite an anchor, that large family, right? And this is coming from somebody who has lived within 30 miles of New York City my entire life, as has my family. So I think maybe that's why I think about your life and bifurcated like that. Like I can't imagine taking that leap, not only Ohio to New York, but then something completely different. And I think that's laudable. I mean, I think a lot of people dream about that, but you did it.
Yeah, I do think that the only thing that makes living in another country, well, I mean, I say this as someone who's living in a country that speaks the language that I grew up with, and so, but it's culturally very different. But the thing I think is the most challenging after 10 plus years of being here is always going to be that it's just much harder to get home to my family. And my dad died in January, and that was just something that really hit home,
Oh.
literally and figuratively, in the sense that it made me feel really far away. It made me realize how much of my adult life I've not spent with my family. And that's hard. But at the same time, I can't imagine not doing the things that I want to do and being someplace I don't want to be because I'm no use to my family that way either. So,
Well, I'm so sorry about your dad,
oh,
especially in
thanks.
this year, and I can't
Yeah.
even imagine, what that felt like.
Yeah. Thanks.
Um, you mentioned starting your career in design. So, did you always want to be a designer, or did you always want to have a corporate gig? Like, how did all of that unfold for you?
No, I don't think I always wanted to be a designer. In fact, I say I don't think. I know I didn't always want to be a designer. When I was in school, I was in musicals and things, and I loved it. But I also was similarly to now, I had about a million things going on at once. So I remember my mom found this planner that I had about seventh, eighth, ninth grade, something like that. And she said that she cannot believe that I managed to do everything I was doing because you could see, she said that swim practice and, newspaper meeting and rehearsal. But I've always been like that. I just like a lot of different things. So I loved doing musicals in school. And when it came to our senior year, we were supposed to be doing Sound of Music. And I had done a fairly big role my junior year. So it was kind of talked about, that I would have one of the big roles then. But we also had two girls who were amazing singers. I'm talking like operatic, brilliant singers. So they did an opera instead. And somehow that just translated in my head that if I couldn't get a big part in my high school performance, what was I thinking that I might pursue that as a thing?
Mm.
So I ended up, one of my other big passions was I thought about the idea of I wanted to be an anchor on the news. I loved kind of writing for the newspaper and I loved that kind of performance element. And I thought they would come together well. But being me, I didn't think it was a good idea to actually go into broadcast journalism. I thought I would do a double major in communications and history.
Wow.
I don't
Okay.
know.
Why not?
Why not? So when I started it, though, I realized the topics were really similar to what I'd done in high school. And I was bored. And I did what people that are fairly come from a fairly strict household do when they suddenly are out away from their family. And I decided I'd rather be out and partying and staying out late. And I thought, I can't do this. I have, and then there was some money situation as well where I just couldn't afford to stay in school. But I ended up kind of taking a sabbatical where I waited tables and spent a little time in California with my ex, all this kind of stuff. And at that point, I decided I'd go back and study something that people seemed to really be into. And the design school at University of Cincinnati, where I was going, was really good. And people were staying up all night, but not to party, to do school stuff. And I thought, wow. And I'd always had this kind of penchant for fashion. Yeah, like thrift store, crazy mixed clothes and stuff, and thought, well, that's what I'm going to do. And I loved school. I loved it so much after that. And I was so serious about it. It was like night and day. So it was the right choice for a time.
So what's really running through here is this search for creativity. Like creativity seems to have fueled you. So what was it like? Now you graduated with a degree in design and you go out into the real world. So what was that transition like?
Actually, I was really lucky because at University of Cincinnati, they do a program called cooperative education, or co-op as we called it. But every other term, I was working in the real world. So it was, I'd go, we had one full year of kind of foundation. And then we went and did actual internships in real fashion companies. And so by the time I graduated, I already had about a year and a half experience in the real world. And funny enough, I kind of remember halfway through the internships going, I don't know if I like this as a job as much as I like it as a school subject.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a few job offers right out of school because of the internships and picked one in New York, was really excited about doing it. And I have to say the job was fun. I had an amazing boss, but we both worked crazy hours. I mean, crazy hours. And really, I think the thing that kind of saved me in New York was that I found triathlon, because that was something that was that was the moment that I started making real friends in New York and found this balance between working, crazy hours and having something else in my life and discovering something that's become a long-term passion for me as well. As far as moving to New York in general, it was funny because I did kind of have this like, I'm going to be this new woman in New York. I wasn't. It was just me in another place. And that's the main thing I've noticed throughout my life, going different places and things, is, it is exciting to be somewhere new, but it's always just, you have the same life, you're the same person, you're just in a new surrounding.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about what spurred the move to the UK and what that transition was like.
So trying to think how to say this in the right order. So I had a little bit of a career meltdown, as in I knew that I wanted to try something different. I knew that I had been doing triathlon as an athlete. I was interested in trying some coaching. I was interested in going back to this acting roots type thing. And I just felt like I needed to make some decisions. And I said to my ex, there's no way I can do this and be working 60 hours a week. Like, I need to step back, make some decisions, maybe take some classes. And he kind of panicked. He went, well, you just want to quit your job. It was just there in the back of my mind. It was this thing. Simultaneously, he had been working quite a bit overseas, coming to London a lot, going to Hong Kong a lot. And I always kind of said, if it ever came up. Originally, he got this offer to come to London for about 6 to 12 months. And I was just like, this is perfect. This is perfect. I can decide what I want to do with my life. I can spend, maybe a year taking some classes. And by the time we go back, I'll know exactly what I'm going to do next. However, before we even had really agreed to 6 to 12 months, it became 3 to 5 years. At which point I kind of went, oh, 3 to 5 years is a long time to step away from life, career. What does that mean? Of course, we ended up deciding to come. And the transition was actually interesting because he came to get a much better role within his company. But at the same time, like, financially, it was still difficult to kind of figure things out. And like I said, the culture is really different. I remember just kind of laying in my bed and looking out the window and seeing the one star I could see in the cloudy London sky, and just thinking, okay, that is the same star that's, somewhere over America, maybe in a different position or however all that works.
Yeah.
And after that, it actually became a lot easier because it was just me saying, I'm in a different country. So, and because I've now been here much, much longer, I'm still a big, loud American to a lot of people.
Something that we never shed, no matter
Yeah.
how we may try.
Yeah.
You said something really interesting about these stirrings. You knew something was off. I mean, you had a job, you loved what you did for the most part. You were in a city that was enlivening,
Yes.
but there were these stirrings. A lot of people can ignore that, but you didn't. So how did you start to work through that? Did they become louder? Did you give them voice? Or was it just, this opportunity came and it all kind of converged?
I would say it all kind of converged. Um, there have been things in my life I do feel like I can kind of say, okay, you need to wait on that. I can be a logical person or a practical person. I guess I think of myself as a procrastinator. I'm a person that I think sits on something a little bit and thinks I'm putting it off and then seems really impulsive about it. But it's somewhere in the back of my mind that there is that kind of stirring or brewing
Mm-hmm.
And then I know kind of when the moment's right, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's very much part of the creative process. It seems less procrastination to me and more that you're an expert of knowing the right time.
Yeah.
Tell me about this journey that you've been on to become an actor. What sparked this love that you had? It sounds like since you were a kid.
I think if we really go back, it has to do with the fact that I started playing the violin when I was about, well, I started learning to hold the violin when I was 2 and started playing an actual violin when I was 3. So I'd always been on some sort of stage. I loved singing when I was a kid. And I just remember singing, to my mom's old albums or Annie and whatever. So I think it was just always there. Part of the thing about coming here was that I was going to try things that I wanted to pursue. And I knew that one of them was definitely acting. And I tried a couple things in New York, like tried to audition for things. But you try to audition for something in Brooklyn and it's supposed to be amateur theater, but it's everybody in New York that's a professional actor that wants to do some work and isn't getting it. And I realized that I was not up to par. So it was just like, what can I do? So I started with short courses here and really liked them and felt like I was pretty good at it. I mean, in as much that you can be good at acting. But yeah, I really liked it. So I ended up going to a 2-year drama school and I was the second oldest person there. And then and then the oldest person dropped out, so I was the oldest. But it didn't matter at all. I loved being around people that, I loved being around everyone. We were all great friends. Again, my triathlon background was helpful because I was physically way more fit than some of the people that were a good 15 or so years younger than me. I do feel like coming into it at an older age is really challenging, especially as a woman, because it's just the time that you're starting to be invisible in the acting world, or at least in, Hollywood and such. And yet there I was.
Mhm. And just for the audience that's listening, you're way younger than I am. So just to put that in perspective, it's not like you were 70 trying to try this,
No,
right? You were,
no, I was doing this in my 30s.
and all the more that, you felt like you were the oldest, the oldest one there in
Yeah.
your 30s, which to me sounds like a baby now. So
Well, it sounds like to me like a baby now too, but but yeah, it was definitely, yeah, it was interesting to kind of all of a sudden, in a way that age hadn't bothered me at all, I started noticing age.
Mhm.
It became something that I noticed all of a sudden, which I thought was interesting.
And you took it, to the next level because in noticing that there weren't a lot of roles for women in their 30s and beyond, you took a big step and created a production company.
I did. So it's sort of a mix because I kept saying my ex, and it is indeed an ex. We split up, and at that point, I kind of needed to know whether I was staying here, how I was going to stay, what I was going to do, and yeah, basically as part of it, my divorce baby slash mission to the world is that I created a production company that focuses on stories, specifically women 35 plus. So everything I've produced thus far has a female playwright or writer involved, a female director, and has to have at least one strong role for a woman 35 plus. That doesn't mean there's no men in my shows, or it doesn't mean that younger people can't get involved, but it definitely, there has to be something that's interesting, that's flawed, that's dimensional, for a woman 35 plus.
hmm What did it feel like to be back in that community when you started to take classes?
I think walking back into that community, it was a bit of a shock to the system. I feel like in a way I felt like I came home, because I was just like, this is definitely something I've wanted to do for a long time. But because I mentioned the thing about the loud American thing, I mean, it was kind of a joke, but I feel like I've done a lot of apologizing here. I was apologizing for my Americanness. So I feel like there was something that was a little bit difficult when it came to, or surprisingly difficult when it came to suddenly being there and realizing that I'd been apologizing for a while and that I was older than everyone else. But there was a feeling of coming home.
Mhm.
And when I got it right, and I use right with quotation marks. But when I was in that moment, it was amazing. And to be able to be physical as part of my job, to be able to be, using my voice, and yeah, I loved it. And there were days that I was so exhausted, and I was like, this is how I want to feel all the time. It was so good.
And then as the founder of the production company, what is it like to be able to support diversity? What does it mean to be able to provide those roles, and why is it so critically important?
So I think my first mission was definitely the women 35 plus thing. And I feel like so far I've really strived in that mission, and I'm starting to be known for that. So many people have come to me and said, thank you for doing that. We don't see enough roles, or I'm struggling as somebody who took time out to have a baby and come back. I'm struggling as someone who turned 50 and no longer sees any roles, or came into it for the first time at 45 or 50 or 30 or whatever age. So in that sense, I feel like I love being able to do it. And sometimes I think, do I need to be acting? Should I just be doing this all the time? But then an acting job comes along and I'm like, I like that part too. And of course, there have been shows that I've done that I've put myself in as well. And it's great because if I don't have something I can be doing, I can continue to practice my craft.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as far as other forms of diversity, I mean, I also really pride myself on the fact that I do think our stories have been really diverse so far. The playwrights that I've gotten in have come up with, and usually it comes through sort of anonymous submission, and I'll read lots of short plays. I've done quite a bit of that. And I love the stories we've been telling. My one full length production was very also age and racially diverse, which I was really proud of. But as far as the community that I'm kind of building, it is really challenging to me to build a more racially diverse community. And I say this not to say poor me, but rather I'd really like to work a bit harder on that. I think once you start building a community and people see, here's a white woman, she's got, she's started these plays with more other white women, and it starts to feel like this white feminist thing, which I've heard people talk about. And I never even knew about that. I just thought, I'm standing for all women, end of story. But once I started hearing about it, I was like, there is something that could easily make people feel like it's not for them. So I think my next phase is certainly that I want to make sure that the message is for everyone. And again, once we don't have to deal with this anymore, I'm happy for men, women, like I'm certainly 100% non-binary. It does not have to be, it's female identifying with my company, first of all. And it does not have to be, black and white by any means. But I do think that that's the one thing that I would really like to feel that I'm successful. I have to be able to see that I'm covering, I'm standing up for all women, not just women who look like me or sound like me or come from the country that I live in or the country I come from. Or so that was a very long-winded answer.
No, that was great. That's great. I mean, these are important conversations, and a lot of people talk about this, but you're doing it. And so hats off. You're also a podcaster.
I am.
And you have a wonderful podcast, and you're a proponent of telling stories of women who have reinvented themselves. So we've touched on that a bit from the playwright standpoint, but how did that become such a passion of this reinvention? Obviously, you've done it multiple times, but to be able to highlight others who have gone through this journey.
It's important for me that we're telling these stories, that the stories of women 35 plus aren't being forgotten. But I think I'm only one person. I've reinvented myself a couple of times, sometimes by choice, sometimes not so much by choice. I mean, I wouldn't have completely started from scratch when it comes to like getting a divorce. That is not a fun moment to have to reinvent yourself, but it is a moment of reinvention. So yeah, I'm one person. And I mean, there are people that have said, oh, I'm so inspired by the fact that you've done this, or, your story is really interesting. And I'm like, oh, my story's kind of interesting, but other people have these amazing stories that I feel are worth sharing. And because I think one of the excuses that people use about women becoming invisible in television, film, theater is that women aren't leading interesting lives. And it's just bull.
Mm-hmm.
It's not true. So, yes, we can write plays. I can have playwrights writing plays that are about these amazing women, or, like I said, I prefer flawed women, but, three-dimensional. But unless I'm also talking to women who are real life women doing interesting things, then I feel like hearing those stories, it might inspire the next playwright that wants to write about something interesting. It might, there might be someone, I've had a couple people write to me through the podcast and say, I listened to a few episodes and I don't know what I want to do yet, but I know I want to do something different. And this is really inspiring to me. And I didn't set it out like, oh, I want it to be so inspiring, but I am inspired by these women. And if that's the case with me, I'm hoping it'll inspire others as well.
Mm-hmm. Is there a favorite story that came through the podcast that you'd like to share with our listeners?
That's so tough because every time I get off of call, I'm like, oh, that was so great. Oh, that was so great. I love them so much. So I should probably say the second chapter is the name of my podcast. But what's really interesting is I've talked to a lot of women who've led the second chapter, the third chapter, the fourth chapter. And sometimes it's really difficult to have to narrow down the conversation because there's so many things I want to talk to them about. But one person who I bring up a lot is Melissa Davey, who had this very successful corporate career. And at 65, they were kind of getting bought out for maybe the second or third time, the company she was working for. And she had the option to basically, she could stay on another 5 years or she could leave. She wanted to be a filmmaker. So somewhere along the way, she had won a day on set with M. Night Shyamalan
Oh, wow.
in some sort of like an auction or something. And she sat there with M. Night Shyamalan. She got to like sit right next to him as he was filming. It was amazing. And she mentioned it to him, and he said to her, well, you better hurry. You're not getting any younger, or something along those lines. And she took it to heart, and she decided that at 65, she was going to go off and become a filmmaker.
Wow.
So her first film, Beyond 60, which tells the story of women beyond 60. So she's really, taking my mission to the next level. But yeah, her documentary is now out and, available for streaming and all this kind of stuff, and has won various awards at festivals. And so, I mean, obviously coming from where I come from, as far as my career, she was a huge inspiration to me.
Mm-hmm.
And she's just really fun.
And she rocks it. I love it. And I'll put links to your podcast as well as the film in the show.
That would be
notes.
fab. Thank you.
Yeah. So we always like to wrap up these episodes with what I call a dose of inspiration so our listeners can get to know you a little bit more. So what are some of your favorite wellness practices? What keeps you in balance?
It's interesting. That question is a challenging one for me. Well, first of all, I think lockdown threw us all out of whack. What really keeps me sane, and I struggle because I've had these sort of ongoing minor injuries that bother it, I love running. And as a triathlete, I am probably worst at running. In fact, I can say emphatically, I am worst at running out of the three sports. But it's the easiest one to put your shoes on, go outside, and go for a run. I mean, you can do it no matter what. However, saying that, I love walking almost as much as I love running. And I walked so much when we weren't allowed to go places here and when everything was shut down. I walked and walked and walked. And when I was going through my divorce and I just couldn't get out of bed without crying and crying and crying every day, I went on a 3-day, 60 some mile hike. And I called it, first it was called the walk of sadness. And then as all these amazing things kept happening, I changed it to the walk of hope because it was just, I mean, yes. So a long answer to your very brief question is I think, yeah, being able to move at all, really. But as long as I get to walk every day, then I'm well.
Walk of hope. I love it. I love it. What have you read or listened to lately that you've enjoyed?
So there's the author Zadie Smith, and she, I read her first, well, I read the first book of hers I read was called White Teeth. And I didn't love it. It was okay in my mind. But I now live in the neighborhood she writes about because it's where she grew up, in Northwest England or Northwest London. And I feel like all of her stories resonate with me so much now because I can really, yeah, I can really relate to them. So the most recent one I read was NW, which stands for Northwest, which is our postal codes. And I loved it because
Mhm.
there's something about reading about, I mean, they're people I can relate to. Most of them did not have a similar upbringing to me at all. But, she's mentioning streets that I walk down every day. And yeah, so I really enjoyed that.
Love it. Envision your perfect road trip. Where do you go? What do you do?
Mm. So I did take a short road trip in Scotland. And when I got there, they upgraded me to a BMW. And my dad and my sister were with me, and my dad had driven a BMW. And I was like, oh, this is going to be great. The roads in Scotland are amazing
Mhm.
and beautiful. So I would love to go back and really spend more time. And my dad was to a point that he wasn't hiking up anything. My
Mhm.
sister would have done, we did little bit of hiking, but I would love to go back. And in fact, I think ultimately I'm probably going to take some of my dad's ashes to Scotland because he had a real affinity with Scotland.
Mhm.
And but I would love to go and just really, really explore and spend a lot of time and climb every mountain, if I dare say
Mm.
that.
Mm.
Uh, Climb every hill.
Gave me the chills. It's almost like another walk of hope.
Yeah, when I started to answer that question, I didn't even think about it, but there is a walk that I really want to do there, West Highland Way. So maybe it's not even a road trip, but the West Highland Way, I imagine, like when I go with my dad, with what's left of him, it will be the West Highland Way.
Mhm.
And he can take that walk with me that he couldn't take before.
I love that. That's beautiful. What has you feeling inspired these days? What's lighting you up?
As much as I'm struggling with getting back out into the world after spending a lot of time being locked down, it is kind of inspiring to get back out. And, I've gone to a few very socially distanced theater things because of everything in London. That's kind of the only thing that seems really still socially distanced. But yeah, being back and seeing some stories live has been really inspiring and exciting to me. My triathlon club has been smashing it this year. I mean, I've got so many people who are doing, new distances and doing new record times, and I think that's the thing. And one last thing, there's been all these women that are these endurance athletes that are winning the races outright, and one of them is someone who is better than acquaintance. Probably not quite fair to say she's a friend, but I hope she would consider me a friend. And she just set this amazing beat the next person by 100 kilometers in 1,000 kilometer bike race. And I'm talking men and women. And I'm just seeing like these women that are doing these amazing physical things are really inspiring me too. So that was a multifold answer, but I am lit up.
That was great. That was great. And one more. What has you optimistic about the future?
Wow, hold on. That is going to take some thought. I think what has me optimistic is as much as people are at real odds with each other at the moment, I feel like politically there's such a huge divide. But I do see what I would consider progress in people understanding that people are different than they are. And I do think the younger generation, it feels so much more tolerant in so many ways. And I think that if that can continue and the people that are out for what I would call good and happiness and, love of other people, as long as that stays the main focus, I really do believe that the younger generation is trying to make the world a better place. I think that's always the case, but I do think that people are pretty special right now. And I know a lot of younger people that inspire me in the same way that I get inspired by a lot of these older women. And yeah, I think we're going to be okay.
Hmm. I like it. It's a multi-generational approach, but there is a lot of hope for our younger generation. Thankfully, thankfully.
Yes.
Well, Kristin, how can our listeners get in touch with you? What's the best way?
The best way is slacklineproductions.co.uk. There's also the second chapter podcast.com. And I mean, I'm all over Instagram as well. If you follow either one of those through Instagram and wanted to message me, then I am very happy to chat with people that way.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, Kristin, I can't thank you enough. It was a really lovely conversation. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It was so nice to chat with you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I know there are many ways you can spend your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with me. Until our paths cross again, be kind to yourself and show your warrior spirit some love. If you know anyone who could benefit from today's episode, please pass it on. And many thanks for supporting the show by subscribing and leaving a review. It means a lot, and it helps others find their way to our circle. If you'd like to access the show notes, have a question you'd like addressed on a future episode, or would like a transcript of this episode, visit www.athenawellness.com/podcast. Until next time, be well.